Okay, welcome everyone. Today I'm going to be giving a high-level overview to our Systems Innovation Guides. You can find all these guides on our website, available there to download. What are Systems Innovation Guides? This is a series of guides for learning about systems innovation. It's also a method or process for doing systems change. So they can be used as scaffolding for a learning program, or also for doing workshops or systems change labs or any systems change initiative. So why do we need a series of guides on systems innovation? So there's a number of reasons for that. Firstly, it's the fact that this whole area of systems change and innovation is quite new to all of us, and that means there isn't really a substantive body of knowledge there. There's not much for people to use when they get interested in this. They hear about it, there's an awareness, but then they find it difficult to find the content they need to actually go and do that. There's stuff out there, but it's all over the place. Books, research papers, blogs, and so on. But there's a need to kind of bring that together and create a single point of access for the many different ideas and models, and that's part of what we're trying to do here. There's also an issue around kind of redundancy, that we're all recreating the wheel within our own organizations around what systems change is in practice. We have some kind of idea of what it's about in general, but then we have to go and apply that, and we find that everyone has to kind of create their own methods and processes because they don't really exist at the moment. So part of what we're trying to do here is create some kind of open source framework for doing systems innovation in practice. So the best way to kind of understand this is as a response to the series of questions one will come across as you try and do a systems change initiative. So it's the different dimensions to actually doing systems innovation. Each guide presents one key aspect to doing systems innovation, along with existing models and methods. So they're the best kind of response that we have at the moment to the core questions you'll experience when you go and do a systems change initiative within pretty much any area. So in a concrete form, this is a series of about 20 PDF guides. So it's a scaffolding that needs to be supplemented with additional content, worksheets, and facilitation. And all good system change initiatives should have a theory of change. A theory of change is the kind of overarching model of how change happens and how you're going to make it happen. So these guides are also tied together with an overall theory of change that links them all together. I'll present that now in a minute, but you may also have your own theory of change, in which case these guides are also designed in a modular fashion so that you can just take one aspect of them and kind of plug it into your own work. Or you can use the overall set of guides, and this is how they're linked together. There's 4 main sections. We start off with systems thinking. This is about changing our way of looking at the world and embracing complexity. Systems mapping, mapping out the system. Systems change, how do we intervene and influence the system in a particular way? And systems building, how do we develop collaborative platforms for fostering the kind of ecosystems needed to realize systems change? So systems thinking, this is the first main section. We all know the same old thinking is going to create the same old results. If we want to get paradigm shifting change, we're going to have to change our ways of thinking, and that hinges around systems thinking. Systems innovation is, of course, based upon complexity theory and systems thinking, so we need to get a good grounding in that to start off with. The first 4 guides are going into different aspects of systems thinking and complexity theory. So the real aim here is to kind of elevate our thinking and our vision from just seeing the parts that we're dealing with in the system to seeing the whole system. That's what we want to get from being good systems thinkers. And systems thinking is going to help us deal with complexity and learn to work with it. So the first guide in this series is around critical thinking. This is about becoming aware of our own ways of thinking. Systems thinking is reflexive in that we're trying to surface our assumptions so that we can become aware of our ways of thinking and looking at the world and how those are enabling us or constraining us in changing. Systems theory, the second guide, we introduce a new paradigm of systems thinking. So this is around becoming aware of our reductionist ways of thinking and how there's an alternative way, this holistic way, synthetic thinking. The third guide's on systems modeling, starting to try to understand what we're dealing with as a system. So systems modeling provides us with kind of a basic language, a set of models to start to kind of get more coherent and rigorous around understanding what we're doing as a system. very useful there in terms of providing a standard language around elements and synergies and systems and environment and so on. Complexity theory is about gaining an appreciation for complexity so that we can work with it. We're trying to change complex systems. We need to understand them. We need to understand their dynamics. We need to change our kind of underlying assumptions because complexity is kind of counterintuitive. It's non-linear. So that's the first section on systems thinking. And now we jump into systems mapping. We should not try to change a system without first gaining a good overall understanding of its structure and workings, and that's what systems thinking is going to help us with. It's a form of systems analysis. We're trying to understand the current state of the system and how it works, particularly with respect to system structure, how the parts are interrelated into the whole. Mapping that out gives us an understanding of how the dynamics within the system create the phenomena that we observe. So this series of guides will walk members through the tools needed for them to start to build their own systems maps. So we start off with the basics of the systems mapping language and get familiar with that. We jump into actor mapping, mapping out the actors in the system, their values, beliefs, models, incentives, power dynamics, and so on. Third section covers causal maps. We start introducing the language of systems dynamics, causal relationships, feedback loops, and so on. Third section is about multi-level mapping, mapping the system out on different levels from the micro to the macro, and how those interrelate and constrain or enable change. So that's the second section on systems mapping. We learn what it is, but then also how to do it, how to actually map out a system. So the third section is going into systems change. We've changed our way of thinking. We've learned how to work with complexity. We've started mapping the system out. We have a good understanding of it. And now we want to jump into trying to actually change it. So systems change is a lot about understanding transition processes. We're trying to work with the innate potential for change in the system. And we call that a transition. It's a non-linear process of change. And this section outlines what transitions are, kind of how they work, and then how we might influence them. There's four main sections here. That first section is on transitions. We look at the three horizons model of change, which is one way of understanding that change process. Two loops model helps us understand how the old system relates to the new system and how we might connect them in the overall transition process. There's leverage points. How do we find those points in the system where we can best intervene? The iceberg model and so on. And systems narratives. How can we start telling stories about the future that are productive and enable us to change? How do we start to really use the future as an open space, as a space of potential for transformative change, and stories play a key role in that. So the final section's on systems building. The job of the systems innovator is to develop collaborative ecosystems that align diverse actors in synergistic ways. So we're trying to here build new forms of organizations, collaborative platforms that can enable whole ecosystems of individuals and organizations to work collaboratively in changing the system. And this requires us to understand and develop new forms of networked organizations. And this section is dealing with the key aspects to consider in building collaborative networks of diverse actors to realize systemic impact. So first section, it's on networked organizations, how to foster and develop networked organizations through platform design. Value models, how do we create new value models for aligning actors within a large ecosystem? How do we scale change? These are important questions at the moment. We're trying to bring together the best kind of understanding of how you go from some small initiative to some larger systemic impact and scale that impact. Yep, how do we assess that impact? How do we invest for systems change? How do we get that kind of feedback learning loop going? So we know where we're going and we know how we're making progress. So that's systems building. So that's a quick overview to the guides. We're open sourcing them, which means we'll open them up for other people to edit and comment on as we go to the second and third version and so on. They're also Creative Commons, which means you can use them as you see fit in a learning program or a systems change initiative.